It feels like the season hasn't even officially begun yet, and already there's a sense that things are getting messy behind the scenes. While everyone is focused on liveries, driver hype, and bold predictions, there's a much quieter story developing that could end up being far more important. Multiple Formula One teams are reportedly at risk of arriving late to the first behind closed-doors test in Barcelona, and that alone is unusual enough to raise eyebrows. Testing is where everything starts to make sense, where theories meet reality, and when a team isn't ready to run on time, it instantly sparks questions about what's really going on back at the factory. What makes this situation so intriguing is that this doesn't seem limited to one struggling outfit at the back of the grid. The whispers suggest that several teams could arrive late, and possibly even one from the very top tier. That's where the word chaos starts creeping in, because top teams are usually the ones with the resources, the structure, and the planning to avoid exactly this kind of scenario. When they're cutting things this close, it tells you just how demanding these new cars really are and how tight the margins have become. Now, before this turns into full-blown panic, it's important to be clear about what late actually means. The Barcelona test has a flexible window, and teams don't all have to run from the very first day. Some might be deliberately choosing to delay their arrival to squeeze in extra preparation time, bring more complete parts, or avoid unpredictable winter weather. On paper, that sounds sensible, but when reports start mentioning unfinished components, delayed approvals, and cars that haven't even been fully fired up yet, the tone shifts from strategy to concern. Here's where I want your take, because this is one of those moments where fan instinct matters. If a team misses the first day of testing, do you think that genuinely hurts their season? Yes or no? Drop your answer in the comments, because opinions on this are always split. Some people say testing mileage is priceless, while others argue that showing up later with a better car is worth the risk. What's undeniable is that this uncertainty creates pressure. Engineers want data, drivers want laps, and leadership wants reassurance that everything is under control. When even one piece of that puzzle is missing, the tension builds fast. That's why this story matters, even if nothing dramatic happens on track right away. These early signs often tell us more than lap times ever will. If you want to stay on top of how this unfolds as testing approaches, make sure you're subscribed and notifications are on. We're closing in on 2,000 subscribers, and every single one of you genuinely helps this channel grow. In the next part, we need to zoom out and look at the bigger reason behind all this pressure, because the real problem isn't just preparation time. It's the regulations, the weight limits, and a technical challenge that almost every team is struggling to solve right now. When you start digging into why so many teams are feeling the squeeze at the same time, the picture becomes a lot clearer. This isn't about poor organization or teams suddenly forgetting how to build race cars. The real issue is that the current regulations have created a perfect storm where almost everything is heavier, more complex, and harder to optimize, while the minimum weight limit has moved sharply in the opposite direction. That gap is where all the stress is coming from, and it's why even well-prepared teams are flirting with delays. The power unit is a huge part of this. The engine is heavier than before, yet the overall minimum weight has dropped by a significant margin. On top of that, crash structures and safety requirements are stricter, which means more material, more reinforcement, and more mass that simply cannot be removed. In practical terms, teams aren't just trying to lose a few kilograms here and there. They're effectively being asked to claw back a massive amount of weight while still meeting reliability targets and building a car that actually works across different circuits. Aston Martin has become the clearest example of how widespread this problem is. The talk is that they could start the season well over the weight limit, and while that sounds dramatic, it's not automatically a disaster. We've seen this story before. A certain team once began a season in a similar position and, after methodically shedding weight through upgrades, ended up in a completely different competitive league. That's why being overweight now doesn't necessarily define how strong a team will be later. What it does do is complicate early preparation and make every design decision far more sensitive. This also explains why some teams might accept being slightly late to testing. If you know the first version of the car is compromised by weight, you might decide it's better to spend extra time refining parts rather than rushing something out just to log laps. But that's a risky mindset, because testing isn't only about performance, it's about reliability, systems checks, and understanding how all these new components behave together in the real world. Losing that running can come back to haunt you very quickly. I'm curious how you see this trade-off. Would you rather your team run early with an overweight car just to gather data, or wait a little longer and arrive with something closer to the final vision? Let me know in the comments, because this is exactly the kind of decision that separates bold thinking from costly mistakes. If this breakdown is helping you make sense of the bigger picture, take a second to like the video and subscribe. We're pushing toward 2,000 subscribers, and your support makes it possible to keep covering these stories in detail. Coming up next, we're going to compare how the top teams are approaching this problem very differently, because while some look confident on the surface, Others are quietly bracing for a very difficult start to the season. When you compare how the top teams are approaching this situation, the differences are striking, and they tell you a lot about who feels comfortable and who doesn't. On the surface, everyone talks a confident game, but once you listen closely to what team bosses and technical leaders are actually saying, you start to hear hesitation, caution, and in some cases, outright realism about how tough the months ahead could be. McLaren come into this phase with a lot of quiet confidence. They made a very early decision to stop pushing hard on last season's car and shift resources forward, and that gamble paid off when it mattered. Because of that, there's a belief internally that their best version of the car still hasn't been seen yet. That doesn't mean everything is perfect, but it does suggest they're not scrambling in the same way others might be. Preparation, rather than panic, seems to define their approach. Mercedes sit in an interesting middle ground. As a works team, they naturally benefit from tighter integration between chassis and power unit, and that alone can save time and reduce surprises. There's also a sense that they've spent a lot of effort simply interpreting the regulations correctly and laying solid foundations rather than chasing aggressive concepts too early. That kind of groundwork rarely makes headlines, but it often shows up when the season actually starts. It's no surprise that people inside the paddock quietly expect them to be very strong. Red Bull, though, sound different. The language coming from their camp is unusually cautious, even humble by their standards. There's an open admission that difficult months lie ahead, along with sleepless nights and plenty of headaches. That's not the kind of messaging you're used to hearing from a team that's dominated for so long. It suggests they know this. Challenge is deeper than simply bolting on a few upgrades, and that patience may be required, especially if early results don't match expectations. That leads to a fascinating question about the drivers. If you're at the top of your game and suddenly facing a stretch where wins aren't realistic, how long do you stay patient? This is where I want your honest opinion. If you were in that position, would you ride it out, or would you already be thinking about future options? Drop your thoughts below, because this kind of scenario has a habit of reshaping the entire driver market. If you're enjoying this kind of behind-the-scenes breakdown, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications on. We're building toward 2,000 subscribers, and there's a lot more of this story still to come. In the next part, we need to put the spotlight on the team everyone is talking about today, because the rumors, delays, and mixed signals surrounding Ferrari are impossible to ignore. See, Ferrari are right at the center of this conversation, and that's what makes the current rumors feel so heavy. When Ferrari are calm, the paddock tends to be calm. When Ferrari look uncertain, everything gets amplified. Right now, the signals coming out of Maranello are mixed, and that's the most uncomfortable place to be. On one hand, there's talk of wanting to stay under the radar, keep expectations low, and quietly focus on execution. On the other, there are reports of delays, late changes, and a build process that hasn't followed the usual order. What really stands out is the timing of those changes. The drivers have already completed their seat fittings, using the newer scanning-based process. Yet the car itself hasn't fully gone through its fire-up sequence. That alone raises questions, because it suggests that elements of the final package were still being signed off very late. Some sources point to last-minute adjustments to the chassis that required additional testing before approval. That could mean Ferrari uncovered a serious issue they couldn't ignore, or it could mean they found something better and decided to push it into the core design rather than wait for an upgrade window. This is where interpretation matters. If Ferrari identified a fundamental flaw, that's worrying. Teams usually prefer to run a baseline car and evolve it later unless the issue is severe. But if this was a calculated decision to integrate a more aggressive solution from the start, then arriving slightly later, it could actually be a sign of ambition rather than disarray. The problem is that from the outside, both scenarios look almost identical, and Ferrari's recent history doesn't exactly earn them the benefit of the doubt. The pressure inside the team only adds to the drama. This season carries enormous weight for everyone involved. Leadership stability, driver confidence, and long-term loyalty are all on the line. A strong start settles nerves instantly, a shaky one does the opposite. That's why even small delays feel magnified. They're not just technical setbacks, they're psychological ones too, especially in a team where scrutiny never fades. So let me ask you directly, because Ferrari fans and neutrals usually see this very differently. Do you think Ferrari are being bold with these late changes, or do you think they're simply running behind schedule? Yes or no? Drop your view in the comments. I'm genuinely curious where you land on that. If you're following this story closely, now's a great time to subscribe and like the video. We're pushing toward 2,000 subscribers. And Ferrari's season alone is going when Ferrari confirmed that their 2026 car will be called the SF26. It sounded like one of those announcements you scroll past without thinking twice. Just a name, right? But if you stop and really look at it, this is one of the most revealing moments Ferrari have had in years. This isn't about branding or tradition. This is Ferrari publicly drawing a line under a project that was failed and attaching their identity to something completely new. In a team where symbolism matters as much as lap time, that decision carries real weight. The SF26 name is Ferrari admitting that what came before simply couldn't be salvaged. The SF25 wasn't a car that needed small tweaks or smarter setup work. It was a concept that asked too much of reality. It demanded perfect conditions, perfect execution, and zero compromise, and Formula One just doesn't work that way anymore. By naming this car the SF26 and openly framing it as a reset, Ferrari are telling everyone, including themselves, that they are done pretending the old direction could still be fixed. What makes this moment hit harder is the emotional backdrop. Ferrari went into 2025 with genuine belief. They came off a strong 2024, narrowly missing the Constructors' Championship, and there was real confidence that they were finally building momentum instead of restarting every cycle. That belief didn't just fade over the season. It collapsed. 0 wins, a distant 4th place, and a massive points gap told a brutal story. This wasn't a bad year. This was a technical philosophy reaching the end of the road. If you're enjoying these deep dives and want to follow every step of Ferrari's rebuild toward 2026, take a second to like the video and subscribe to the channel. We're pushing toward 2,000 subscribers, and your support genuinely helps keep this kind of content coming. What's important here is that Ferrari aren't dressing this up as bad luck or missed opportunities. By positioning the SF26 the way they have, they're effectively saying the SF25 was structurally flawed. That takes a level of honesty Ferrari haven't always shown in the past, and it matters, because under the next set of regulations, denial is punished faster than ever. Extreme concepts with razor-thin operating windows don't just struggle, they collapse. I'm curious what you think about this. Do you see the SF26 name as Ferrari admitting failure, or do you see it as a sign of strength and clarity? Drop your answer in the comments. And quick yes or no, do you think the SF25 concept was doomed from the very beginning? This naming decision isn't the story by itself. It's the signal that everything underneath has changed, and once you understand why the SF25 failed so completely, the logic behind Ferrari's new direction starts to make a lot more sense, because the problems they faced went far deeper than lap time alone. Understand why Ferrari felt forced into such a hard reset. You have to look at the SF25 without excuses. On paper it never looked disastrous. The numbers weren't embarrassing at first glance, but Formula One isn't fooled by surface-level competitiveness. Over a full season the truth always comes out, and for Ferrari, the truth was brutal. 0 wins across an entire year and a 4th-place finish weren't just disappointing, they were diagnostic. This wasn't a team missing a final piece. This was a car built on an idea that only worked when reality cooperated. The SF25 demanded perfection to function. Its ride height sensitivity was extreme, which meant that the moment track conditions changed, performance fell away. Slight temperature shifts, bumps, wind changes, or tire degradation all pushed the car outside its narrow operating window. Once that happened, Ferrari were no longer racing, they were managing damage. Plank were forced conservative setups before the lights even went out, sacrificing downforce and tire performance just to stay legal. That's not how you win races in modern Formula One. The driver results made this impossible to ignore. Charles Leclerc, a driver in his prime, managed only 7 podiums across a long season. That's not a reflection of his talent. It's a reflection of a car that couldn't sustain performance across race distance. Even more telling was Lewis Hamilton's season. For the first time in his career, he went an entire year without standing on the podium. That doesn't happen because a driver suddenly forgets how to race. It happens when the car beneath him erodes confidence weekend after weekend. If you've been watching Ferrari for years, this pattern probably feels familiar. The SF25 looked clever, complex, and theoretically fast, but it collapsed the moment conditions weren't ideal. Formula One today punishes that kind of thinking with tighter fields and more sensitive regulations. A car that only works in perfect circumstances is effectively broken. Ferrari weren't being beaten by one dominant rival. They were being exposed by variability itself. I want to know what you think here. Did you expect Ferrari to struggle this badly in 2025? Or did this catch you completely off guard? And if you had to choose, what hurt Ferrari more, aerodynamic instability or mechanical sensitivity? Let me know in the comments. If you're finding this breakdown useful, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. We're closing in on 2,000 subscribers, and hitting that goal helps us keep delivering this level of analysis without shortcuts. The most important realization Ferrari made is that this wasn't an optimization problem. No amount of fine-tuning could turn the SF25 into a stable, predictable race car. The architecture itself was wrong for where Formula One is heading. And that realization becomes even more critical when you factor in the 2026 regulations, because those rules don't just reward strong concepts, they aggressively punish fragile ones. That's where the SF26 story really begins to take shape. The 2026 regulations are the moment where Ferrari's old approach simply stops working. This isn't a gentle evolution of the current cars, it's a fundamental shift in how performance is created, managed, and sustained over a lap. Cars will be smaller and lighter, but paradoxically harder to drive. Power units will deliver roughly half of their performance electrically. Fuels will be fully sustainable and active. Aerodynamics will constantly change the load on the car. In that environment, any concept built on a narrow operating window is exposed immediately. Active aerodynamics are the real multiplier here. Every time the car switches between low drag and high downforce modes, the balance shifts. If the mechanical platform underneath isn't stable, those shifts become unpredictable. That unpredictability feeds directly into energy deployment problems, braking inconsistencies, and rear instability on corner exit. Ferrari appeared to have understood that chasing extreme peak downforce numbers under these rules is a trap. What matters is how exploitable the car is when everything is changing at once. Energy deployment under the 2026 rules is just as unforgiving. With such a high proportion of electrical output, combustion efficiency becomes critical. If the engine's thermal behavior fluctuates, the electrical side suffers. That creates a domino effect through lap time, drivability, and tire degradation. Ferrari's takeaway from the SF25 is clear. A car that looks fast on a perfect lap but falls apart over a stint is effectively useless. The SF26 is being designed to function across changing loads, tire states, and aerodynamic modes, not just at the peak of the curve. This is where Ferrari's philosophy shift becomes obvious. Instead of asking how fast the car can be in ideal conditions, they're asking how often the driver can access the performance that's there. That's a subtle but powerful change. It's also one that aligns closely with what the 2026 rules demand. Consistency becomes a performance metric in its own right. Stability isn't a compromise, it's an advantage. Do you think active aerodynamics will expose more teams than it helps, or will it level the field? Drop your take in the comments. And quick yes or no. Do you believe the 2026 rules will punish aggressive concepts more than any regulation set we've seen before? If you want to stay ahead of every major technical shift like this, make sure you're subscribed and have notifications turned on. We're building toward 2,000 subscribers, and following this reset season in detail is exactly what this channel is about. All of this philosophical thinking isn't abstract. It shows up very clearly in the hardware Ferrari are choosing for the SF26, especially in the suspension and power unit. And those decisions tell you more about Ferrari's priorities than any press release ever could. When you look at the actual technical choices Ferrari are making with the SF26, the philosophy shift stops being theoretical and becomes very real. One of the clearest signals is the expected move to push-rod suspension at both the front and the rear. This would be Ferrari's first rear push-rod layout in well over a decade, and it's not a nostalgic decision. It's a practical one. Push-rod systems give engineers more freedom in how components are packaged, reduce unsprung mass around the gearbox, and most importantly, offer better control over ride height sensitivity. That last point goes straight to the heart of Ferrari's problems in 2025. The SF25 forced the team into conservative ride heights just to survive races without excessive plank where downforce was being sacrificed before the weekend even started. With the SF26, Ferrari are aiming to stabilize the car mechanically instead of constantly correcting it aerodynamically. A car that remains legal and predictable across a wider range of conditions unlocks performance that never shows up in peak numbers, but wins championships over a season. The engine choices reinforce this same thinking. Ferrari's commitment to steel alloy cylinder heads is one of the boldest decisions in the entire project. Aluminum has been the default for decades because of weight savings, but under the 2026 rules, absolute lightness isn't king anymore. Minimum power unit weight is rising, and Ferrari are using that allowance to prioritize thermal stability and combustion efficiency. Steel allows higher pressures and temperatures to be sustained over race distance without the fluctuations that kill efficiency and drivability. That efficiency matters more than ever when energy deployment limits define lap time potential. Small gains compound over a stint. Better thermal control means more usable energy, more predictable deployment, and less stress on the electrical systems. It also reduces cooling demands, which opens the door to tighter bodywork and a narrower rear end. That improves airflow to the diffuser, reduces drag, and stabilizes the car during active aero transitions. The engine isn't just producing power, it's enabling the entire aerodynamic concept. Ferrari have paired this with a more compact battery system designed to improve energy, density, and smooth transitions between harvesting and deployment. In 2025, inconsistent energy behavior often affected braking feel and rear stability. A refined battery architecture directly improves drivability, tire management, and driver confidence, especially on corner exit. And that brings us to the drivers. Lewis Hamilton's influence is clear in how Ferrari are redesigning the cockpit, steering wheel, and control interfaces. The 2026 cars demand constant management of energy, brake by-wire behavior, and aerodynamic modes. Ferrari's response has been simplification without loss of control. Hamilton thrives when feedback is clean and predictable, and the SF26 is being shaped to restore that connection after a season where trust was repeatedly broken. Charles Leclerc benefits just as much, but in a different way. His strength lies in rhythm, consistency, and long-run tire management. A car with a wider operating window and smoother mechanical behavior plays directly to that skill set. Over a full season, that consistency often beats raw qualifying pace. Ferrari's testing approach confirms that this reset is cultural, not cosmetic. Early running is focused on correlation and validation, not lap times. Barcelona is about proving that the car behaves exactly as expected before performance is layered on. Even the planned B-spec rollout reflects discipline, building on a stable foundation rather than patching weaknesses. So here's the real question. Do you trust this new Ferrari mindset, or do you need to see results before you believe it? Let me know in the comments. And quick yes or no, is this the most disciplined Ferrari project you've seen in years? If you've enjoyed this full breakdown, make sure you like the video and subscribe. We're pushing toward 2,000 subscribers, and your support helps keep this level of analysis coming. To give us no shortage of talking points. In the final part, we'll step back and look at what actually happens if teams miss early testing, whether it truly matters, and how much of this could just be noise before the real running begins.